Welcome this very cheery Sunday evening. Welcome to Three Wide. I'm Rick. I'm joined tonight by Anthony.
Hey, everybody.
Our third member of our team, Peter, is not with us this evening, but he has chimed in with results from Talladega, which we will be talking a lot about tonight. Anthony, there is so much to talk about this evening.
There really is.
We have a group of folks I know that are patched in, looking on, and excited about the race results this afternoon at Talladega.
Absolutely.
And that's all the great folks at Chase Elliott Nation. We're hoping that they enjoyed the race. We know they did. We hope they're going to enjoy this show because we're going to be talking a lot about this afternoon's race. And then when we are wrapping up later on, we've got a special surprise for everyone. We talked a little bit about it back on Wednesday, and that is we're going to join you for a special edition of Three Wide tomorrow evening. And that is going to be dedicated to the memory of Dale Earnhardt Sr. Tomorrow would have been his 68th birthday. And during that show, we'll talk a little bit about who he was, what he represents to the NASCAR universe, and we'll play a little game of what if the events of February 18th, 2001 had never taken place, what NASCAR would look like in a world that still included Dale Earnhardt Sr. So tune in tomorrow night for that. I know Anthony will put out a posting as to the time.
I'm going to flood social media with that.
Probably sometime around 8:30 Eastern time, so that the good folks on the West Coast can watch us during their dinner, or maybe even kind of listen in on their drive home from work. But tonight's topic is Talladega, and what a race. Now, I see you're all decked out in your Hendrick Motorsports garb.
Absolutely.
Why don't you show folks what you're wearing tonight besides the great Hendrick Motorsports hat?
The one and only Chase Elliott Napa team shirt to represent my favorite driver on his first victory of 2019. Victory, I think, that came as a surprise to most, considering the track and the Ford dominance that we've seen in the past. But also, it's important to mention, it's his fourth victory in a Cup career, and it's the fifth Chevrolet victory in the last season and a quarter or a third at this point. So Chevrolet's got their room to improve, but I think with Chase Elliott leading the way, we have some bright spots to look forward to and a lot to talk about today as far as manufacturers.
We do. Now, a quick review from our show on Wednesday night. The three of us made some interesting picks, and for a while there this afternoon, it almost looked like we were going to finish 1, 2, and 3.
It did. It did.
I know that Peter had picked Brad Keselowski, and for a while there, he was running consistently top 5. You had picked Eric Almirola, and I'll tell you, he looked really good. All but really the last 20 laps or so. And then my pick was really an interesting one, I thought. Kind of went out on a limb a little bit, and I had picked Ricky Stenhouse Jr. And until he kind of did himself in very late in the race, he looked like he was going to be a contender. And it's interesting. People say that NASCAR is not a team sport. And I think we found out firsthand today that it is, in fact, a team sport. Not only what we saw, and we'll talk about this more, about manufacturers working together, teams from a particular manufacturer working together. But we also found out what happens when you're not very well liked. And, I know that in our little corner of the racing world, we talk a lot about being a good guy in the garage. And I think Ricky Stenhouse found out today what happens when you don't have many friends around you.
Yes, absolutely. He looked like a driver that was a one-man team, and not somebody that has been around the Cup Series for a while. He looked like he was a driver that was treated like somebody that this was their first or second race that nobody trusted.
Right.
And I think you've seen that develop over the last two or three. I guess we could still call it a restrictor plate race or a super speedway. I don't know what we even call this race anymore. But the last few Daytona and Talladega races, I think you've seen that, especially the bright, not the bright point, but the shining light on that is if you go back and listen to the Daytona 500 radioactive segments, you hear um, a lot of drivers do not trust Ricky Stenhouse with the way that they were conveying to their crews that they did not want to be around him. He seemed a little bit more docile at the beginning of this race, which I was pleased to see. I liked that some of the drivers that I thought were probably going to take the most risks actually didn't with the way that the package played out. Um, but it'll be interesting again to see if maybe Fox Media does highlight those comments, if there were any. I would love to see if there was the same sentiment towards the end. It sure looked like there was a few drivers in particular that were just getting fed up with him chopping. One in particular was probably Martin Truex Jr. that I noticed, but he was getting some pretty close calls even from the Penske boys. Most notably, I think on lap 4 or 5, Logano cut right up on him. And in my head, I'm thinking if that's with 5 to go instead of 5 laps in, the Truex isn't lifting to let Logano up on that lane because you could see that Logano was cut a big break. But yes, I think Ricky is lucky to have gotten as far as he did in that race with the way that he was racing towards the end.
Tonight, we're not joined by the third member of our team, Peter, and Peter was able to patch into us with some of his thoughts on today's race. So why don't we go right into what we're now going to call Speed Racer's Corner, which is a segment that we'll do whenever Peter's not able to work with us. As our audience knows, Peter is a school teacher, so he's busy getting lesson plans together for tomorrow and getting things ready to kick off the start of his work week. So let's get carried right off to Speed Racer's Corner. The first thing Peter wanted to talk about today is the crowd at Talladega. I was absolutely blown away with just the packed grandstands. Of course, 80-degree weather and sunny weather is a big plus because, as we said last week, Talladega can be very, very tricky this time of year as far as the weather's concerned. Your thoughts on the packed house today at Talladega?
I wasn't so surprised with the packed house. It's Talladega. It's right in the heart of NASCAR country with the Alabama gang being the historical marker of that area. It's not Charlotte, but it's as NASCAR can get without being Charlotte Motor Speedway or Daytona. To see it absolutely packed and for Fox to do that huge shot leading to the green flag of the race, the crowd was amazing. They were into it at every restart. At every restart, after a stage, after every yellow flag, you could hear them cheering for the start. It brought up in my mind that for the last few races, definitely Bristol. Well, Bristol was a little different because you had DW waving the green flag, but normally Fox Media or Fox Sports does do like a panoramic shot from the crowd down to the start of the race. And I don't remember them doing that for the last few races, especially Richmond. Richmond, they used to always try to get a picture of the crowd on their feet and waving and come on down to the start finish line. It's a very small grandstand to begin with, so it's an easy shot to take. I haven't really noticed that, especially on the restarts. They had a few opportunities to do that in past races, but in this race, they did it a lot. They showcased the full grandstands. The weather was beautiful. It was iffy to go into the weekend. There was reports that there was a strong possibility of rain today at the beginning of the week, and I did notice on forums and on Facebook pages that there were some fans that were weary of that and worried about the weather. But it's Talladega. You're not going to stop the party, and as long as the gates are open, people are going to fill the stands. So it wasn't a huge shock. It was great to hear fan reaction at the end of the race for Chase. I think you've heard that every race there, but it was great to hear that enthusiasm and that the sound of the crowd, and for Chase to have to speak up to be heard over the crowd, I think was awesome. So for the state of NASCAR, for Chase to win at Talladega in front of a sold out crowd, it's one of those things that NASCAR needed, and it came at the right time. Extremely satisfied with the turnout, obviously, as NASCAR would be and all the teams would be.
It's interesting. As I was watching the race this afternoon, the thing that occurred to me is we're going to talk more about the racing in detail. But the thing that occurred to me is that great racing, that exciting racing, will bring out a crowd. And NASCAR, and okay, here it comes, the gratuitous, little play on words. NASCAR hit it on all cylinders today. They really did. I thought this was as close, and I was commenting to you guys off air earlier this afternoon. For me, this was as close to old school racing as I've seen in years. If NASCAR can capture this, and there is only one Talladega, but if they can capture this kind of environment, this kind of mindset, whether it's the technical setups, the drivers driving the way they did today, it was just magnificent. And I will tell you, any disgruntled NASCAR fan who has spent the past 5 or 6 years bashing the sport actually missed something special today. They really did.
Absolutely. This was one of those races that I'm not 100% clear on what you mean by old school racing, as far as if it was 80s or 90s or early 2000s, but this reminded me of the like 2002, 2001 to like 2006 and 7 era, where I used to subscribe to motorsports magazines, NASCAR Illustrated, and I remember one of the covers, I think it was for 02's fall race, was 59 lead changes. Wow. And this was one of those races that threw me back to that generation. And it's got me really excited for the type of racing we may see at Daytona later on. But that's for probably another broadcast.
Yeah, I'm sure it will be. Peter raised another great point. He's got about 6 points he wanted to talk about tonight. And the second one is really interesting, and that's the reemergence of Barstool Sports being involved with reporting on NASCAR. And it's interesting. I think as NASCAR started to take its various hits for not just the questionable racing, kind of boring racing, vanilla drivers, poor crowds, not great television coverage, constant rule changes, both from a technical perspective and from a seasonal perspective. Some of the media outlets really started to, particularly those media outlets that weren't mainstream media, started to leave the sport, started to have less of a exposure in the sport, and you're starting to see them come back, and that's, I think, is a great sign that that NASCAR is revitalizing itself. The mindset appears to be much different, and I think we are on the verge of that renaissance we've been talking about for a couple of weeks now.
I think so too. And I hadn't noticed that the president of Barstool Sports was actually at Talladega. If he was, and I'm sure he was, that's actually really cool for the sport. Like Peter mentioned in his notes, the Barstool Sports website, Facebook pages, and radio station on Sirius XM does target the generation that is who we're trying to capture, with ages of 18 to 40. They're very brash, raw, unfiltered, especially the president. Believe his name is Mike Portnoy or Dave Portnoy. If he doesn't like something, he's going to tell you. If he likes something and he loves it, he's going to shove it down your throat until you like it too. One of his favorite segments actually is he visits random pizzerias all over the country. and he actually badgered Mike Francesa on his radio station. Called Mike Francesa on Mike Francesa's radio station and basically like begged him to do it. And because Mike didn't want to do it, he basically called him out and said, "Oh, you're no fun." So this is a man who will tell it like it is. The radio station will tell it like it is. If they're gaining traction with this, I think this can be something that's very good for the sport because it's just another media outlet for the age group that NASCAR should be starting to target in the teenage years up through the 40s and grab them and just run with them. And I think NASCAR should embrace this.
And that's actually a great point that age group. I would hope that it's not the 18-year-olds, but certainly the people that are between 25 and 40 are young parents, and that translates to something even bigger for the sport, and that is embracing the youth. So if you've got that guy that's 35 years old who is a Barstool Sports disciple, and he starts to get on board with this, and he's got young kids, that's going to filter down. So those kids are going to start paying attention to NASCAR with their dad, and they're going to start embracing drivers, embracing television coverage, etc. So this has great potential, and really that's what NASCAR needs. NASCAR desperately needs outlets like Barstool Sports, quite frankly, like this one here, that is providing a platform for NASCAR fans to talk about the sport, to learn about the sport. I saw a posting earlier this afternoon on Chase Elliott Nation's site, a young lady who is brand new to NASCAR. And she said, does this really mean that he makes the playoffs? Chase Elliott makes the playoffs. And of course, people were chiming in on it and explaining, yes, in principle, it means he will. But, if we had 17 winners and he didn't have a high enough points, he wouldn't make it. And that whole thing. And that's passing that word by word of mouth and watching forums and being involved in forums like Barstool Sports and like this one here and all the other great podcasts that are out there is great for the sport. We've talked about it in our sessions that we're going to have a NASCAR 101 show and just sit and explain what this sport is about, what it is you're seeing when you turn on Fox or NBC to watch a race, a little bit about the tracks and their configurations and the cars and how they're set up so that the new fan can understand what they're watching when they tune in on a Saturday night or on a Sunday.
Absolutely. I do think I think we're going to see an age where more social media reaches the sport, and for somebody like Barstool Sports with that big of a name and big of a following, it's only going to spread word of mouth. It's going to get into people's heads.
The third thing Peter wanted to talk about, which I thought was fantastic personally, is the package that they used today. I thought it gave us great racing. I thought it gave us that side-by-side racing when it did happen. It gave us the great pack racing. It gave us the opportunity to have passing. I mean, as I said earlier, when you say old school, we didn't just see a whole lot of let's just run laps. You actually saw really competitive racing for, really the whole afternoon. I thought it was really the first time I've seen that comprehensive and exciting race in a long, long time. So what were your thoughts on the package, and should NASCAR continue with this sort of trend from a technical perspective?
I was blown away by the package. It was completely different, 100% opposite of what I thought it was going to be. As far as the type of racing we were going to see, if we recall in the Wednesday broadcast, I thought we were going to see something more 80s style where you're going to see 3, 4, 5 cars break away. And you were just going to see pockets of maybe 5 to 10 cars racing each other. And there was going to be exciting racing in those pockets, but it wasn't going to be a whole field like we had seen in the past. And like I said earlier, this package really reminded me of the great restrictor plate racing that we saw in the early 2000s all the way up. I think through the Car of Tomorrow, just before the tandem racing started, you saw lots of passes, lots of momentum. You saw lots of maneuvers. You didn't see anyone who was just complacent, really running third, fourth, or fifth for very long. There was always people trying to make charges, trying to make passes. The great thing about this package, I think, is it really did equalize that high line. You didn't see them even really, for the most part, even try to run the high line, to try to just get into that rhythm like you saw in the 500 and you saw in the restrictor plate races last year. It was a little bit of the same thing that we've seen, but I think it changed it up in just enough of a way where it made the racing exciting for everyone to watch. It was the best racing I can recall at Talladega in quite some time, as far as just constant on the edge of your seat. Like, you got to watch what's going to happen next. You don't know what each lap is going to look like. And it's something that we're not used to because of things that we've seen over the last few years. And I think it's something that will continue to happen at the future races. I think this has proven itself to be a package where you can't just ride behind somebody for that long, because you're going to get a run eventually. It's inevitable. It's one of those packages, like drivers were saying, and they even had to make a rule change over the weekend to add the 1-inch wicker over the spoiler because the closing rates were so fast, and so much more than they thought. And even then, I have to applaud Fox for putting that live graphic up of the speeds, because you could really see, especially towards the end. I think it was Stenhouse, before he got turned or before he was put into the wall. He got left out to dry, and if you watched his miles per hour, he was at 203 when he was getting that run to try to take a position, and then when he got hung out to dry, he plummeted to 193. And if you were watching those graphics as much as I was, I think at some points I was watching those more than I was watching the cars on the track, just because it was so innovative. To see them be able to get that much of a run, that's what created the passing. This package created better racing. It's been a success. I feel like it's going to be a success at Daytona without a doubt. I want to see them not play with it for the next season or two. I don't want to see next Talladega race for the playoffs be different than this Talladega race. I think the racing was great, doesn't need to be changed. The addition of the wicker was probably a good move. A lot of people complained about the maneuver. I wasn't too happy about it. I feel like they should have just let the package play out. But it did prove to, I guess, create an even bigger pocket and keep the pack actually a little tighter than what most thought. This is a package I wouldn't mind seeing through the rest of what we are now considering Generation 6 leading into Generation 7. I would not mind seeing this package at Daytona and Talladega. Now, the other thing I was thinking of, Rick, was these are all with the tapered spacer 550 motors, which are the same exact engine package that we're seeing at places like California, Texas, all the mile and a halves and bigger. Do you think that this is now the textbook argument that you can make to maybe remove those tapered spacers at tracks like Talladega, or not Talladega, Texas, Atlanta, California, Michigan, to let them open up and create more power and maybe create more passing that way? Or do you think now it's an argument of, well, Talladega was really exciting, let's try to tighten up the rest of those tracks to replicate it?
It's interesting. There's been so much um, movement with package setups over the past few years, and I'm kind of an advocate of, I think we found something here, and I would be less inclined to remove the spacer, for the Texas races, places like Vegas, places like Charlotte, etc. Personally would not remove it. I would try to, hone in on the success that we've had today, and see how that works. They can always go in reverse. I know that a significant part of the NASCAR universe was disappointed in the sudden change over the weekend. But as it turned out, it gave us a great race today. There isn't any reason they can't do the same kind of thing in reverse in a place like Texas if they absolutely need to. That to me, um, I think that we had such a good race this afternoon that NASCAR has to strongly consider keeping the package as is, and then see how it goes in places like Texas. Um, One of the things that struck me about this race this afternoon is how much, as a fan, and really, even though we love NASCAR, we study it, we eat, sleep, and drink it, we're fans. At the end of the day, we're fans. You never see me without this giant thing of water, courtesy of the Yukon Huskies, and um, as an old guy, you drink too much water, you've got to kind of get up from time to time. And I have to tell you, I was on the edge of my seat all afternoon. I found it very difficult to get away. And, it's funny. It was the first time in a long time that I thought about Fox's coverage and how Fox did their cutaways for commercials when they weren't actually doing the side by side coverage. Um, you know, they they would cut away for a full commercial, and it was like, "Don't go away. Something's going to happen. This is way too exciting." That's the first time I can remember in a long, long while in a NASCAR race that we had that kind of excitement, and I really think that that for sure, uh, if NASCAR can kind of capture this for the rest of the season, NASCAR is going to find itself in a much better place than it has probably in the past decade. Um, the other thing that happened today, which I know there's a lot of people tuning in and are very happy about, is not just the fact that Chase Elliott won. He's a tremendous young driver. He's one of the new faces of the sport. He's going to be for a long time. But the fact that Chevrolet was successful and actually had a great run, up and down its lineup, that to me was very significant today. And back on Wednesday night, we kind of discussed and debated whether Chevrolet could find speed at Talladega, and find speed they did. I've spent all afternoon kind of high fiving everybody I possibly could find, saying, the bow tie is back. Tonight I'm sitting here dressed in black because obviously that's the patron color of all good uh, Chevrolet fans. At least we old school guys.
Yeah,
Black,
absolutely.
black means something to us. But it was just a great thing to see Chevy back in victory lane. It's something not only they needed as a manufacturer, obviously Hendrick Motorsports needed it as a team, but more important, NASCAR really needed it. It's interesting. Every now and then you capture lightning in a bottle, and you hope you can again. We had great weather. We had a wonderful crowd. The package was spectacular. The racing was great. A very popular driver won, and a manufacturer that has gone through some very hard times recently found itself in victory lane. Your thoughts on Chevy's resurgence today, and have they found something?
I think they've continued their dominance of horsepower as far as the Daytona Talladega. Like I said on Wednesday's broadcast, I think I'm a little skeptical as to weighing all in based off of results of a track like Daytona or Talladega. It did take Chevrolet working together to get that result. It wasn't just one or two cars blowing past each other. But then again, none of the manufacturers really, for the most part, did that all day. The interesting thing for me was hearing the post race broadcasts on Sirius Radio, and it seems like there were teams of Chevrolet that got together on top of actual Chevrolet executives that are part of the racing program, and spoke to the drivers in a whole meeting over the weekend, I think on Friday, and talked to them and encouraged them to work together to try to get the best result for the brand, and obviously to get one of their drivers in victory lane. That's something we kind of saw little hints of last year around the second Pocono race, I believe, a week or two before that. Hendrick, RCR, and one or two other teams, satellite teams, wanted to try to get together to try to do something with as far as research and creating a complete package of Chevrolet cars and just put the best product out there that they possibly can with all three teams. I think this might be the start of that now that you have Chevrolet, the brand itself, directly involved and encouraging results. I think that's them also saying, hey, we're falling a little behind the eight ball here, and let's see what else they can develop from that. Great as always to see Chevrolet in victory lane, especially at a track like Talladega, where there's a lot of demand on the engines. There's a lot of demand on the drivers. I do think that you can take something small away from the fact that you did get a Chevrolet in victory lane, and the top four positions were taken. Let's not also forget Kurt Busch had a great day. He was really the unsung hero for Chase's victory. He did punch that hole through and drag Chase with him to help give him that lead. It wasn't just handed to him, of course, but there was a lot of help from Kurt Busch, who is really coming into his own this year. I think he's embracing the smaller two-car team where he can focus more on his racing rather than possibly focusing on the culture of the team, because SHR does focus on racing first, of course, but it also does seem like it is a little bit of a party culture there. They just not party as far as a
anything that Tony's
anything
running.
deterring. No,
No,
well,
what are you talking about?
they like to have fun, is what I'm saying. You got guys like Clinton, Harvick, and Smoke, and last year with Eric and Kurt. You're gonna have a party culture. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but maybe it could have been a little distracting for Kurt. Who knows? I'm not saying that for sure. I'm just speculating. But for Kurt to be now in what I consider a leadership role at Chip Ganassi, he's really come into his own. He's showing himself to be a very big team player, especially today with what he was able to do with that car towards the end of the race. Hey, look, he pulled out and passed his brother and helped the Chevrolet win. So I'm going to call him a good team player for that. But to see Chevrolet perform was very encouraging. To get Chevrolet's first victory out of the way for the season. Granted, it's way longer than any one of us would have hoped for. And it's also their first victory since Chase won at Kansas. It has been a long time coming, but at least we don't really have to hear about, are they going to win again? Now we just have to wait for the next one to happen.
Right.
And I'm going to put my eggs in a basket and say, if another victory is going to happen, I think you have a dang good shot at Dover with Chase. And I think you have a dang good shot with Kurt Busch or Chase Elliott to be one of the next two victors. But I would tip my hat a little bit more towards Chase Elliott as far as who can get the next Chevy victory.
Well, Chase had obviously a tremendous run today. I'm catching up on all of the postings on Chase Elliott Nation, and obviously we want to give a big shout out to them because they are so very kind to all of us here at Three Wide. The folks at Chase Elliott Nation have to be absolutely ecstatic. They have been ringing, I'm sure, that siren like crazy over in Dawsonville, Georgia, and rightfully so. Chase, it's interesting. For a young man, he is very, very poised. That's the thing that struck me in his post race interviews. He was. You could tell he was very excited, but he was, under control. You could tell that this guy is going to be one of the faces of this sport for a very, very long time. So, it's exciting to see this. We're seeing, the handoff, I think, from Jimmy Johnson to Chase Elliott. He is really stepping up in a leadership role at HMS. And I, for one, am not at all surprised. I thought that this young man has conducted himself very well. Look at that. Look at that, paying homage.
A little bit of the Suarez juice there.
Mr. Suarez. I just am tickled to death over Chase's performance today, because it's not only, again, good for HMS, it's great for Chevrolet, it's great for all of the Chase fans, but it's really, really good for the sport. In our first edition of Three Wide, one of the things we talked about is bridging the gap between old people like me who harken back to, the awesome Bill from Dawsonville days to today. And how do you keep people like us involved in the sport? And Chase is a great example of how you do that. He's certainly a legacy, as they say, but he relates not just to people that are older, but he relates to that young fan. I guarantee you, by the time we get to Pocono later this year, you're going to see tons of Chase Elliott merchandise in the grandstands, in the concourse, over in the fan zone. He is going to rapidly become, the face of the sport. So that's a great thing for all of us. I think.
Yeah, I don't doubt that at all. Especially just to make a quick note on that. We were at Dale Jr.'s last race at Pocono, and you still saw a lot of 88 gear, and then you saw a good amount of 24 gear when he was in the 24 car. And then last year you saw a little bit less 88 gear that had Junior's name on it, but I think you also saw a lot more 9 gear that probably replaced that. I think that Chase Elliott has been the natural progression and the plan of Hendrick's for the last almost probably close to a decade. I remember probably even in the late 2000s, like 08, 09, when Hendrick was having some serious interest in Chase's career. Even in the early 2010, 2011, when he started racing late models or super lates with Aaron's on the car. This always seemed like the place that he would end up. For Jeff to have handpicked him as a successor, essentially, and for Dale Jr. to have bred him through Junior Motorsports and his programs there. The kid wasn't just thrown into the spotlight. There's pictures of him sitting in Senior's lap. There's pictures of him right next to his dad in Victory Lane, sitting at the Brickyard when his dad won it in, I think, 2002, 2003. He's used to being on the big stage, being part of Junior Motorsports instead of a lesser populated and a less reserved team. Helped him be ready to jump into a Hendrick Motorsports car and deal with that pressure. He's had his name on his shoulders ever since he came up through the ranks of K&N, going into trucks. He's probably one of the most hyped drivers that we've seen up until Christopher Bell. I remember the Cup Series broadcast talking about his Truck Series debut, and his Truck Series debut was like still a few weeks away. And I think the only other driver probably before Chase's eventual rise to the Busch Series and the Cup Series, the only other driver that was hyped like that was Dale Jr. in 1999, when they started the whole promotion to go into the Cup Series, bringing the Bud car up to the Cup Series in 2000. So I think that Chevy has a star for sure on their board. Hendrick has a great young talent that can, and like you said, probably already is a great leader in that team and is following in Jimmy's footsteps. And I think it's just a great pillar to put your name on and to look forward to the future if you're a Hendrick Motorsports and Chevrolet fan.
And don't forget, and this is again for all the Chase Elliott fans out there, and even if you're not, don't forget tomorrow you get to go to one of our favorite restaurants and buy 10 wings, and
it's on here somewhere.
Get there it is. 10 wings for free, and you get those free fried pickles.
Yes.
So
the free fried pickles come anytime he finishes in the top 10. You get those on Monday. And they have an amazing special on Sundays because of race day or any race day, even if it's on a Saturday. It's 20 wings plus a giant pitcher of any beer, domestic. I think it has to be a domestic beer for $15. So that
Well,
in itself is worth going on Sundays to go and watch that race.
then I imagine tomorrow throughout the day for lunch and dinner that your local Hooters will be very, very busy.
Yes.
And I know that they are thrilled to be able to do that because getting that name in Victory Lane is really big.
Yeah, you'd be surprised that whenever we go to our local spot, the waitresses don't really know about the promotion because they don't even know what NASCAR is for the most part. But the managers, if you ever ask the manager, like, "Hey, you guys do the promotion?" They're like, yeah. Chase finished in the top 10, of course. Yeah, you guys get your free pickles.
Well,
And if you go in after the race on Sunday, you can take advantage of the free pickles as well, even if it is a Sunday evening. You don't have to wait until Monday.
We've had that happen to us at Outback because, as you know, we're big Harvick fans here, and the waitress had no idea what a Kevin Harvick was. Never mind who he was.
You get the typical line. Let me ask the manager. I don't even know what that is.
So a manager came over to us, and naturally we got the bloomin' onion. So we've talked about today's winner, but there were some great surprises, both positive and negative, in today's race. And I'm going to start with a couple of the positives. And unfortunately, his day didn't end the way we would have liked to have seen it. But Matt DiBenedetto continues to surprise people. That's a quality driver right there.
He is. He is. He's a driver that in recent memory is one of the only ones that ever bet on himself and didn't have anything else to fall back on. He had results in his previous team, so he did have a resume, but he didn't have a sponsor to fall back on. He didn't have a bankroll to fall back on and be like, all right, well, if I don't get a good ride, at least I'll be able to fund myself. He left the team last year. They wanted him back, and he knew that he was a capable enough driver where he deserved a better ride. So he decided to leave. I believe he was on Go Fast, right, with the 32 car.
Yes.
He decided to leave Go Fast. Said, nope, I think I'm going to get a better opportunity. I think somebody else is going to come knocking that could give me a better ride. And the LFR, Levine Family Racing 95 team came knocking. They told him that they have a deal or talks in place to become a satellite team for JGR. And it's paid off for him. He's run good at some tracks, not great at others. If you look at his track record, minus whenever he got involved in wrecks at Daytona and Talladega, he has run very good at those tracks. He's run pretty good at mile and a halfs, even places like Phoenix. I remember last year when he was fighting to get sponsorship, and I think Denny Hamlin and Darrell Waltrip wound up buying quarter panel space on the 32 car at Phoenix. The praise that DW and a lot of these guys, even Jeff, were giving him, saying that this is a guy that deserves a better ride. This is a guy that can do it. He's not just some guy you throw in a lower tier car just so that you get some seat time and some sponsorship time. He surprised a lot of people. I think a lot of people thought that this was a move into the 95 that was either a sidestep for Matt or it was a downgrade for Joe Gibbs Racing as far as not having another Martin Truex in a satellite program. But for Matt to be in the car, I think he's going to improve along with that team. You got to also remember that team is now going from Chevrolet to Toyota. They got a whole new chassis and frame and aero to work with. So it's going to be interesting to see how that team progresses, but I think you've got the right driver in that seat to help the team go in the right direction. Speaking
of young drivers that had a tremendous day, coming in third today was Ryan Preece. Now he's a local guy for us. I'm going to share with our audience. He is one of 3 or 4 people that taught my son Ben how to race many years ago, and we'll have an opportunity throughout the season to talk a little bit about that sort of thing on a local level. But Ryan had a tremendous day, and if you look at his stats throughout the year, He's taken very good care of his equipment. He's performed very, very well, and his day today was tremendous. I thought third place at Talladega is not an easy thing to do by any stretch, and maybe this is the start of big things for that young man, and he's really paid his dues coming up through modifieds and various lower level short track programs. And obviously knowing him personally is a little bit of an advantage, but I thought he had a great day today.
Yeah, he ran the race that he needed to run. He showed patience. When Busher crashed out, he did lose his one and only teammate, but he did show the patience that he needed to survive to the end, and he made the right moves at the right time. I think also that last red flag where there were a few other drivers that pitted, I think moved him up a little bit in the field. Probably got him a little bit closer to the front than it normally would have if everybody had stayed out. But he showed the patience. He made right decisions at a track that I think you haven't had to make quick decisions like this that you have in a while at Talladega or Daytona. But yeah, no, he ran a good race. It's going to be really interesting to see him come back to the short tracks is where I'm really eager to see him. I'm really eager to see how he runs at Dover this coming week, and to see him run at Loudon is going to be quite interesting. To see a driver go to a track that he's won everything there is under the sun except for a NASCAR Cup Series race. It reminds me of the hype of somebody like Juan Pablo Montoya going to Indy in a Cup car and see how he can do in that car.
Should be interesting to watch. On the downside, and we talked about this on Wednesday, and that is Joe Gibbs Racing today. Okay. I was going to say, for those of us that are old time Seinfeld fans, you remember the episode where George's fiance passes away from the toxic envelopes, and the doctor is trying to explain in court what he thought George's demeanor was. And you just showed that right there, Anthony. I would call it restrained jubilation.
It's not jubilation as far as Joe Gibbs Racing did not have a good day. It's more of jubilation of I told you. You saw on a few occasions, with the exception of I think probably a few times when I saw Hamlin and Eric Jones nose to bumper for more than a straightaway, it seemed, before they got into the turns. They just didn't want to work together. There were so many times where I saw Kyle Busch and Martin Truex Jr. up towards the front of that pack, and you would get one of them would get a run, and instead of try to push the teammate, give the teammate a little bit of a nudge, even if there was nobody in front of him where it seemed like it was just perfectly safe to do so, you would just hang the other guy out to dry, and there was just no teammate love, it looked like, at all among any of them. The only two that I saw work together for maybe more than a lap was Eric Jones and Denny Hamlin, and even that didn't last long. I mean, if you look at where Joe Gibbs Racing finished in this race, everyone was you got Eric Jones finished 19th. You have Kyle Busch, who did finish 10th. He was the top finishing Joe Gibbs Racing driver. You had Eric Jones 19th, Martin Truex Jr. in 20th. But that doesn't, like we know, that doesn't mean they were running side by side at all. That they could, or nose to tail, they were probably running side by side for that finish. And then you did have Denny Hamlin, who did crash out in an accident, but even then, I don't think you're going to see a Joe Gibbs Racing driver win one of these races. Like Kyle Busch didn't even come close. He sniffed the lead, but nobody wanted to work with him. You also have to remember, there's only 7 Toyotas in the field. They don't have a lot of friends if they don't want to work with each other, and there's technically five of those cars are in the same facility with the 95 car included. So if they don't want to work together, you saw what happened with Ford working together the last few years, and you saw what happened today with Chevrolet working together.
Right.
If those JGR guys don't want to work together, you're not going to see them win one of these style Talladega Daytona races. You saw it with Hamlin in the 500 because you were able to, like, he took advantage of that high line. He knew how to run that. I don't think you can do that in this type of a race with this type of a package, and I think that's a good thing. I think you need to force people to work together like you used to see in the past with Dale Jr. and Tony Stewart. But yeah, my jubilation isn't because they had a poor finish. That's an added bonus. But my jubilation was just because my prediction still continues to hold true, and I think it's a battle of egos.
Absolutely. You said that Wednesday night. You said, we're going to see something with JGR that is going to be their downfall for this race, and that was the inability to work together as a team, to drive together, to give each other, that little nudge when needed, etc. And it came to fruition. So what does Coach do at this point? This seems to be, to me, kind of a cultural thing in the shop there. And I don't know that Coach Gibbs is like, despite his obvious background of being a successful athletic leader, I don't see him being quite like Rick Hendrick, where he's going to call these guys into an office and say, "Okay, guys, we have to play nice together." And that may well be because of the makeup of who those drivers really are. You don't have really the kind of personalities there. Certainly Martin Truex Jr. is capable of being a great leader, but I'm not so sure. We've talked a lot about Kyle Busch. He's a tremendous talent. You can't take anything away from that. This is not a Kyle Busch bash forum or anything like that. The guy is a superb driver and certainly one of the elite drivers of this generation. That said, he's not exactly going to be on everybody's Christmas list. Yeah. So, how do you get that team to work together, or can you?
See, if you're Joe Gibbs, I think you're okay with not winning a Talladega or a Daytona race as long as it's the one in the summer and not the one in the fall. You want to win the one in the winter. You don't. I think if you're Joe, you don't change anything because of how successful those drivers are at every other track. How to incentivize them? I don't know. Maybe throw something out there. I was thinking because I was like, how did Chevrolet really like change the tide with this race and with the executives? Like, what did they say to the drivers? And one of the things that kind of entered my head, and it's not something that's bad or illegal or bounty wise, but it's like, what if Chevy said, well, if a Chevrolet driver wins Talladega and we take the first 5 spots, just as a theory, like if you're directly behind and you help a Chevrolet driver, we'll say the Chevrolet driver gets $1 million bonus from Chevrolet, and then the guy who pushes them gets a $750,000 bonus. Like that's something I can see Chevrolet saying, or Ford saying, or Toyota saying to their driver, saying, "Look, if you win, we'll give you $1 million check, and if somebody from the same camp pushes you, they get $750,000, so they don't really have to worry about I finished second." We saw that in 2011 when Junior pushed Dale Jr. or when Junior pushed Jimmy Johnson to the win at Talladega. Jimmy Jr. openly said, I knew I wasn't going to win the race. I was pushing Jimmy to the win because if I wasn't going to push Jimmy, we both weren't going to finish first. And ironically enough, Junior finished 4th while glued to the leader's rear bumper because of how wild that finish was. But he said, I wasn't going to mess Jimmy's chance up because we want a good finish for Hendrick. I think Joe maybe needs to incentivize them to work together that way because you didn't see any kind of willingness among drivers themselves to do it on their own accord. I think the only thing to maybe incentivize them is like throwing cash bonuses out there. Because what are you going to say? Like, oh, like you'll be in my high praises, like you're Kyle Busch, you're Martin Truex Jr., you're Denny Hamlin, you're Eric Jones, you're already at the highest praise that you can get from Coach. And so the only real way to incentivize them to work together and to get a strong finish is to say, look, You win. Here's 500,000. If you finish second and push him to the victory instead of going side by side, here's 400. Make it worth their while monetarily. Money talks.
Oh, of course it does. Of course it does. Any other negative surprises you saw out of today's race?
I can't really think of anything bad that I saw as far as what came from the package or as far as what came from the style of racing. There was a little bit of complacency in the middle of the race where I started to think, all right, well, the race is like kind of hit its lull. But then it came right back up with a full fledged shot of monster energy right into the veins. I can't think of this race basically showcased exactly what this package was meant to do. And I think it was a great result. I think that this result and this race and the way that the race went on with all the action and all the passing and with the I'll call it a shocker of a winner was everything that NASCAR needed out of this first race without a restrictor plate at Talladega. There was no negatives to take from it. We saw action. We saw great finishes. We saw great restarts. I can't really think of much of a negative, to be completely honest.
Let's chat for a moment about today's television coverage, Fox's coverage. We talked a little bit offline about what appears to be a transition with Fox. It's if you know what you're looking for, it has become somewhat obvious over the past couple of weeks, and that is, and I know that there are many people that are out there that are watching, that are listening, that have been very critical in recent years of Darrell Waltrip. And I don't know how you feel, Anthony. I watched today's coverage, and I found myself almost feeling very sorry for him. It appears that there is, even before Fox's coverage ends over the next several weeks, to turn things over to NBC, there appears to be a transition going on in the booth that doesn't really include DW as a vital part of the telecast. And your thoughts on that? And maybe you don't agree with me.
I do see that. We did talk about this in passing. We never really talk much about the media coverage unless we see something like blatantly out there. So I do think, and to me, it's still a little bit of speculation just because I don't think Fox would really do this, but it seems like it's more of a dynamic that's happening in the booth rather than something that's being scripted by what Fox is, I guess, coaching them to do. And it does seem like for the last few years, with Mike Joy, Darrell Waltrip, and Jeff Gordon in the booth, it was the Mike and DW show, and Jeff was there and kind of learning his role. And it seems like this year, even I think before we heard the announcement of DW retiring, which is why I think you started to hear those rumors that week before. I'm still one of those people that really doesn't think that Darrell was willing to announce his retirement at Bristol. I think it just lined up perfectly with the speculation and criticism of him, whether or not you think it's justifiably so. I think is all held up to the individual. I do feel that his style of broadcasting and the commentary that he was bringing and some of the knowledge he was bringing is a little bit out of touch with how current racing is. Jeff Gordon is much more current to what racing has been because he's the closest to being fresh out of a car. I think if you were to take Darrell Waltrip and have him take on more of a Mike Joy approach, where it was let me be in charge of where the conversations go. I think Darrell Waltrip is somebody that could find a job in another media company as far as broadcasting NASCAR, whether it be radio or somewhere with NBC. You never know how long Rick Allen or Jeff Burton or Steve Letarte are going to want to be in a booth. So I think Darrell Waltrip is still viable in a booth. I think his role just needed to change, and he may not have been willing to change that. I still do think this was more of a move from Fox saying to him, "Hey, maybe it's time we go in a different direction." We've got Mike Joy, who's been around NASCAR as long as I can remember, and we've got Jeff Gordon, who's kind of taking over the role. But I have seen that transition in the last few weeks where it seems like it's much more of a conversation between Mike Joy and Jeff Gordon. And Darrell Waltrip is kind of just trying to interject to remind the folks that he's still part of the broadcast, which is a little sad to see. I do think um, that might just be naturally occurring because Jeff and Mike know they're going to be together next year. And who knows, maybe Fox is leaning towards only having two guys up in that booth. I think if you were to leave Jeff and Mike alone and not introduce the third, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think they would make an amazing race broadcast for the viewers and for the listeners at home. But I do see that transition. I kind of hope it doesn't continue. I really do hope it doesn't continue for the rest of the season. As far as it seeming like DW's more of an afterthought, and you've kind of already given him his retirement write-off. But I hope it changes. But I do see what you're seeing, that they seem to. I think it's more of a subconscious, natural thing. I don't think it's something that Fox is doing. I'll put that.
No, I didn't, and I didn't think so either. That wasn't really how I felt. There is a very clear to me indicator, the way the broadcast unfolds, the way the telecast unfolds, that since 2001, it was clearly Mike Joy's and DW's booth, and it does seem to have changed over the past few weeks. I agree with you. I hope that they honor him appropriately. I did notice today the Tide sponsor had on the driver's seat the Tide logo with the words "Thanks DW." Those things I think are completely appropriate. It doesn't really matter what the fan thinks of him at this point, how worn his delivery might be. He is an icon in the sport. There are very few people who are either still with us or are actually willing to be goodwill ambassadors for the sport. He has been one. He deserves the respect that goes with being a champion and being around the sport forever. I do agree that he's a little bit out of touch with some of the way the cars work today. The cars are not the same as the cars he drove. But I do hope that they show him the proper amount of respect over the next several weeks. We have talked off air about this. I think personally, the place for DW would be, and obviously it won't be with Fox, would be in a role that is as a. I'm going to date myself here, guys. There was an old time. Actually, I'll even say it this way. There was an old time news broadcaster, a guy by the name of Mike Wallace. Now, people who watch Fox News know his son, Chris Wallace. All right. Mike Wallace started out as a reporter way back in the 1950s with CBS, and he kind of became one of their statesmen. And he was one of the guys who was one of the originators of 60 Minutes. And as his career got older and older and older, he kind of became less relevant. And that sounds familiar, doesn't it? And Mike Wallace ended up taking on a role where between he and Andy Rooney, they were kind of the last word before 60 Minutes went off for that week's edition. And I always thought that DW could have a great place being in a post-race coverage in a place like FS1, FS2, NBCSN, something that is off the major network, off the major coverage, to kind of provide some insight as kind of a wraparound for the race that we all just saw. I still think he has something to contribute. I hate to see, folks that have that level of experience being put out to pasture, because we have so very few of them left that can connect today to yesterday. And I just think that there's a place for him, perhaps not in the booth, but something post race.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe even just back in Charlotte, sitting with the guys like Jamie Mack and Larry Mack, just feeding a little input. I think that would be an appropriate role for somebody like him. I know for sure. I think Larry Mack actually has like a Sirius XM radio booth set up in his house. And I would think something like that would be really cool to put inside of DW's house. I'd have no problem with having like a Darrell Waltrip radio show or seeing him still in the future. I do think it has been time for a role change. I never want to see a legend of our sport go and ride off into the sunset like that. But again, I do think it was time for a change. I do hate to see him go. But I do think that, like you said, his relevance to the sport is a little bit weathered. And it is time for that change to either just go with two guys in the booth with Jeff and Mike, or bring in a fresh face. Maybe bring Jamie Mack up from the booth. Maybe use this as like a teaching season for him and bring him up into the booth with Jeff.
Interesting thought. I did think that Fox's coverage today was one of the best, and I guess a great race brings that out. It was one of the best coverage of a race that I've seen in a long, long time. Those aerial shots were fantastic. I actually thought that one of their aerial shots was going to pick up on a major wreck, that we were actually going to see the big one from the sky, which would be a unique perspective to see it. A little bit about Kyle Larson. What a tough way to end his day. And I have to tell you, and we'll talk a little bit about safety tomorrow night when we talk about Dale Earnhardt and not just the fallout from his accident and why the sport is safer today because of him. Boy, I'll tell you, that barrel roll, the way those cars are constructed, to have somebody just get out, walk away, and I'm sure he's rattled, and probably some bruising and whatnot. But good grief, when you see that car barrel rolling like that, and on its roof and just kind of tumbling, that's just unbelievable that somebody could walk away from something like that.
Yeah, I didn't see the initial flip. As soon as Chase took the lead, I think with 3 to go, I started getting on the edge of my seat, and I was like, "Oh my god, like this might happen." And then you started seeing the Chevy straight out. I was like, "Oh, this has got a really good shot of happening." When nobody was making a run with the white flag to go, I was like, "Oh, this is." I was like, you know what? And then as soon as Ricky went into the wall, I was like, throw the caution, just throw the yellow. Come on, he's close enough to the finish line where it's a danger. They didn't throw that, and I was like, he just needs a wreck. I was like, he just needs a wreck to happen. He's gonna win. And the wreck happened, and as soon as the yellow came out, the Fox Live coverage didn't immediately pick up on his wreck. And first, just say thank God that he is okay. That was a very, very big wreck. But yeah, I jumped up. I took my eyes off the TV. I looked at my wife and my daughter, and I started celebrating. It wasn't until a few moments after that I did start to see the footage. That trajectory he took into the wall was scary. For that car to lift like that and to hit that safer barrier at that awkward of an angle, if like for him to be okay is a true testament to the safety of it. And even Kyle Larson said it in his interview outside of the infield care facility. A huge thanks to Chip Ganassi and building strong chassis to protect drivers. Don't forget, when he was in the Nationwide Series, he was the car that had that amazingly horrific wreck going into the catch fence at the end of the Daytona race, where his motor wound up in the stands and he wound up 200 feet down past the start finish line. He has a picture of that car on his social media. He has that car. If you look inside the cockpit, the floorboard where it meets the protector for the transmission is ripped out from the wreck. So he's had his unfortunate fair share of wrecks. Remember, I think even 2017 at Auto Club, he blew the right rear on the straightaway and he went 180 miles an hour straight into that safer barrier and the car lifted on him. But he's just a driver this year that cannot get out from under that dark cloud. That bad luck is chasing him wherever he goes. It's going to be tough, but I think he's got a really good teammate that's going to help him out of it.
I agree with you. He's a great young driver, and he'll recover from what's been a really difficult 10-week start for him. We've put a wrap on Talladega. Let's talk about Dover next week. That is a totally different animal than anything else we've seen so far this season. Your thoughts on Dover?
I'm excited because it doesn't seem like, to me, Dover will be that much different than we've seen in the past, because in reality, Bristol wasn't that much different than we saw in the past as far as the racing. I feel like this is going to be one of the few tracks that we're going to be able to see a little bit of what we've seen in the past and embrace it. I think you can look for some of the top contenders from years past, some of the Joe Gibbs guys, Stuart Haas, Chase Elliott, and some of the Hendrick boys to be strong. I think Chase Elliott should be considered a favorite to win Dover. It's going to be exciting. In one of the interviews that I heard afterwards, the competition director of Hendrick Motorsports mentioned that Dover is going to be super exciting in the regards of now they're going to be racing with the side window on,
Right.
as opposed to having that completely open cockpit. And we've heard comments from Kevin Harvick say at tracks similar to Dover, if you add that window, you gain a few tenths just by that added downforce on top of the added downforce of the splitter and the radiator pan and that spoiler. I think it's going to be really exciting, but let's not forget a lot of the guys that have been good the last year or so at Dover were also really good in 2014, 2015 when you had those tall spoilers and you had those big splitters. One of those names is Kyle Larson, who did battle towards the end of those races for a few chances at victory. So I think this could be a good rebound race for him, considering it's a track that he does particularly perform pretty good at if he could stay out of trouble and out of that wall.
I'm going to run a couple of names by you for next week and give me your thoughts on them. The first one, and today he got caught up in a wreck. Unfortunately, it was fairly early in the going, but he has really been somewhat snake bitten in this early part of the season. And, we keep saying early part of the season, but we're making that turn toward the first third of the season.
Yeah, we're closing in on the 12th race with Dover, no?
Yes.
Yeah.
11th. 11th.
11th. Okay.
11th. So, Kevin Harvick, what is going on there?
I would have expected him to have at least one win by now, and to me, it would have been at a race like Atlanta or Texas. I don't know if he's gonna redeem himself from a unfortunate luck early on from Talladega at Dover with a victory, but I think you can't count him out at Dover for a strong finish. He always seems to be somewhat in the mix towards the end of the race. Him and his team, no matter what track they're at, they find a way to at least get a solid finish out of it. I look for that to continue. I don't think it's a track that he'll win at. I think I've got a few other drivers in mind for a potential victory. But by golly, like compared to last year, this is like a Harvick we haven't seen in a while, and it's still not a bad year for Harvick. That's the thing. Like it's not a bad year for him, and it's kind of you're still kind of shaking your head like what's happening with him.
Right, right. The second driver is one that we haven't talked about all evening. We haven't talked about all year. We didn't talk about a whole lot last year either. But he has a history at Dover. It's a pretty good history. That history is years ago. And we're talking about the driver of the 48, Jimmy Johnson.
This could be a race where he stays fresh in people's minds. I think he can pull out a top 10 at this track. I think Hendrick has been improving their program since last time we were out there last year. Definitely over the course of this season. They're starting to show that they've got a handle on this tapered spacer package, I believe, that they're going to be contenders in the engine power department. Jimmy and Kevin Meandering seem to be building a little bit more chemistry together. Again, he was kind of snake bit today at Talladega, or else I think he would have been right there up in the mix, running over a piece of debris and instantly blowing a tire going into turn 3. With the worst place you can blow a tire going into the turn. If he would have blown it 100 feet earlier, entering the turn a little bit sooner, he would have been able to save it and possibly salvaged a good finish instead of falling 10 laps down. We've seen flashes of really good racing from Jimmy this year. Dover is a place that I think, yes, you do need a good car, you do need a good setup, but a lot of it is also driver and how to get around that track. And I think Jimmy's one of the best at Dover right now, figuring out how to get through that. And he knows and he can convey exactly what he needs to get that out of the car to show some type of success. And I think he will have some success if he gets blown out of the water, like he did at I think Atlanta, where it was like he was kind of battling for lucky dog positions all day. I'd be pretty shocked.
It should be interesting. I think Dover is one of those tracks that is a lot like Pocono, where there really isn't any other place quite like it. You've got that tremendous sloping, that downhill, you know, uh, uh, coming under the bridge there, and it's just a very unique track. What I'm hopeful for is that we have the kind of weather in central Delaware that we've seen down south. That's a track where in recent races, it used to be one of those tracks where you couldn't get a ticket. You just couldn't get a ticket. Now it's a pretty easy grab for any fan that wants to go there, and I'm hoping we see the stands filled at Dover next week with good weather and great racing.
I think we will.
Because I think NASCAR has to build off of the momentum that we had today. I think people are going to be talking about this race all week long. Just how great it was to see the big crowd, how great it was to see the great racing, how great it was to see Chevrolet doing as well as it did, and having arguably the new heir to Junior's throne of being the most popular driver go out and actually win the race today.
Yeah. For him to be able to follow that up with going into probably arguably one of his strongest tracks as of late will be exciting. I think Dover is a track that is more exciting in the sun, gets a little slicker, more lanes. It'll be exciting. It'll be really cool to follow up Talladega with another exciting race. I think you're not going to have a problem really filling the seats at Dover. You never seem to, even when it's a fair weather or cloudy weather race, just because to me, it's almost in one of those perfect locations where it's not too far of a drive from New York City or the tri-state area to make it a day trip, but it's also not too far from places like Richmond and the Virginia, West Virginia, Maryland areas, Pennsylvania, even to make that pilgrimage to that track. for a 1-day excursion and be able to fill those seats. And the track always seems to put on a good show.
They do there, and it's one of those races that is a lot like, and it's not the same track, obviously, but it's a lot like Loudon, where people just don't talk about Dover a whole lot. It's kind of forgotten. It gets pushed into the background, but it is always good racing there. And
very underrated track. It's severely underrated.
Yeah, it looks like it could be another great week for NASCAR. And with that, Anthony, we're going to talk a little bit about tomorrow night.
Okay, before we get into that,
Sure.
I'd like to just take a moment and thank some of our viewers for commenting. We have Ari Pelly, who seems like she came via the Chase Elliott Nation page, as well as Leland Cortez, and an active viewer right now, Chase Wise, who says Chase is the best damn NASCAR driver, and he shares the opinion that he thinks that Chase will win more races this year. And Chase Wise, I tend to strongly agree with you on that. We haven't even seen him visit some of his best tracks. He visited Martinsville earlier, almost stole one from Brad. Talladega was a track where I always thought he could win at, and he proved it. We're heading into Dover. We're going to see him at Charlotte. He has been snake bit in the 600, but I think if you put him in the seat for a full 600, you're going to see him go. And don't forget, we're going to visit all these places all over again.
Well, it's great to see the viewers commenting, and it's heartwarming to get involved with the viewers and the listeners, and to get their take on the race, on the sport, on this show. So keep those comments coming. We haven't yet pulled our rookie stripe off the back of the panel yet, but we are glad you're with us. Spread the word. We'll talk about that as we wrap up this evening's edition of Three Wide. But we thank you for being with us. Thanks for the comments, and keep on watching. If there's a topic that you'd like to see us tackle, by all means, pass it along in the comments, and we'll put together a show to address your topics.
Oh, absolutely. I think if we could definitely start gathering up for a Q&A maybe at the mid-season point.
That would be great.
Yeah. Anything about racing or about us, and we'll answer the questions.
We are already in the planning phase of a NASCAR 101 show. Now, for the diehard fan, that may or may not be appealing, but we would invite the hardcore fan to help us with that, with your comments, because we have a lot of at the tracks that we're familiar with, we have a lot of newbies out there, and we want to invite them all to the NASCAR family, so that you can turn on the TV on a Saturday night or on a Sunday and be just as engaged and just as informed and just as excited as all of us, each and every week when the NASCAR season is in session.
Absolutely.
Tomorrow night, we are going to commemorate the birthday of Dale Earnhardt, and it is something we had talked about for a while. And obviously, this man has been talked about forever, in terms of his contributions to the sport, his time in the sport, the contributions to the sport in his own demise. If not for Dale Earnhardt, we don't have the safety things that we have today. But we're also going to talk a little bit about what would the NASCAR world look like if he had not passed away at Daytona. What would the sanctioning body look like? What would the packages look like? What kind of role do we see him having in a NASCAR world today? Would DEI still be around? Would Dale Jr. still be driving? And we're going to tackle a lot of those what if questions tomorrow night in a special edition of 3 Wide. And I
Absolutely.
hope we can have Peter with us tomorrow night. He brings a unique perspective to it, having been a huge Jeff Gordon fan, and it's interesting. If Peter and I had known each other back in the day, we might not be great friends right now. So, because you know who my guy was forever.
Yeah, but it's hard not to like Peter.
Oh, I know.
I think you guys would get along. You just would refuse to talk NASCAR with each other.
Yeah, that's probably true. So we want you to tune in tomorrow night for a special edition of 3 Wide. Anthony, you will be sending out a post to advise everybody of the time.
Yes, same as always, although I might post quite a few more times considering how important this broadcast is to us, just like everyone. But this is a huge one for us because it's not necessarily talking about current racing as far as current events and things that are happening today and tomorrow. This is more of a piece of NASCAR history for us. And it's something that we hold very true and dear because he was a very important figure in our lives for quite a few number of years, and the loss of him was felt a little more than what people might imagine a loss of an athlete would be for somebody.
You know, he meant different things to different age groups. You know, when we did our first little biopic in our first episode, we revealed that you're 30 years old, and I had revealed I'm twice that. So Dale Earnhardt meant something totally different to me than he did to you.
Yes.
And yet, despite some of those differences, there are enough things we have in common that made us both huge fans of the number 3, and we're going to explore some of those things tomorrow night. So be sure to join us tomorrow evening for a special edition of 3 Wide as we commemorate the memory of Dale Earnhardt Sr.
Yeah, it's going to be a good one for sure.
Well, we missed our third partner this evening. We are so very happy that he was able to contribute to the broadcast. As always, Speed Racer comes up with a unique way of looking at every topic about racing, and for those that don't know, both Anthony and Peter are part of a race team that we have that goes karting frequently. Are you going to do that? He is going to show it. Wow, you went through that much.
Shameless plug. Shameless plug.
Well, that's okay. For those that don't know, Belltown Hill Orchards is my wife's family's farm here in Connecticut, and they make all kinds of jams and jellies and sauces and vinaigrettes and whatnot. But it's a fruit orchard, and we will, throughout our season here on 3 Wide, we'll kind of intersperse little vignettes about farm life. Actually, the third member of our race team, my son Ben, he's gone off to bed because he's got to get up to start the frost protection. For those that are in the warmer climates watching tonight, here in southern New England, we're actually supposed to have temperatures down in the low 30s. So that's not a very good thing if you're trying to raise a 200-acre farm. So
there is now a link to belltownhillorchards.com in the chat for all viewers to visit.
Wonderful. Well, that's great. So with that, we're going to bring a close to this edition of 3 Wide. Anthony, tell us a little bit about how people can join us every week, get the latest information about our channel, and view our episodes in the event that they're not able to view them live.
Okay. The biggest thing that you guys can do if you come across our channel is hit the subscribe button. That'll give you notifications whenever you sign into YouTube as far as any of the recent broadcasts or uploads that we have. If you hit the bell icon next to the subscribe button, that's even better for us and for you as well. It gives you immediate updates whenever we schedule a live event and whenever we do go live on our broadcast. It'll also let you know of any other notifications or bulletins that we put out there, as well as changes to our schedule. I'm thinking, Rick, probably within the next month or so, probably by the Coke 600, I think we will have our own Twitter account as well to follow. That will be able to give much more immediate and much more frequent updates and notifications as to things that we're thinking. We can start polls on Twitter as far as suggested topics. What did you guys think of the race? And put up a whole bunch of things for you guys to respond to. And then just get more viewer input into these broadcasts. It's great to be able to talk about it, but I really want to know what everybody else is thinking. So in the next few weeks, look out for a link to our Twitter page in our description as well. But the biggest thing is hit that subscribe button and press that bell notification to get immediate updates on our channel.
Well, that's great advice, and we are so delighted for those of you who have joined us. For the folks that commented tonight, thank you. We appreciate your watching us here on 3 Wide. We're delighted to be with you at least a couple of days a week. Tomorrow night is a special edition again. So sitting here at the top of the war wagon, I am reminded to look up to the tower, and as a reminder, until that spotter tells you that you are clear,
You're
are
3 Wide.
Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. For Anthony and Peter, who wasn't with us tonight, but will be tomorrow night, I'm Rick. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night.
Take care, guys.